Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Truth. I'm your host, the one you love the most, Niall Heston, back with a brand new episode here on The Truth. Back once again with my boy AJ Ponciano. AJ, how are you doing, man? We got to talk about news that rocked your world today, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say rock my world. I'd probably say it's more joyful. They coming off a horrible loss. You get some good news that next morning. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, I'm a Saints fan. We lost to the worst team in the NFL, in Carolina Panthers, and then we go out and fire our head coach Dennis Allen, which I'm very happy about. I will. That's one of my hot takes or my takeaways from this week. Is something about the Saints. So I won't go too far into it, but today bittersweet. You get to see the end of the era of Dennis Allen. That's really been screwing us over the last two seasons, but then also we still have losing to Carolina over our head.
And I don't know if you're going to touch on this in your takeaways as well, but I also want to kind of talk about this as well because I know you had texted me about the Olave injury, and then Michael Thomas went to Twitter to talk about his former quarterback in Derek Carr. So, kind of, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's kind of proving why Michael Thomas was right. I mean, I get it. I'm gonna be a Michael Thomas fan the entirety of my life. He was one of my favorite players for the Saints. Just watching him, but what his old tweets are saying, it's not wrong if you look at Dennis Allen's tenure as a head coach right now, the last 2.5 seasons with the Saints. I mean, the Olave thing was crazy. I mean, there's conversations that he may just hang him up at this point. This is his fifth concussion in the last season and a half, but essentially, I mean, his brother went to Twitter, basically subtweeting everything Michael Thomas said about Olave and about Derek Carr. I mean, it's just a lot going on right now. Like I said, I'll kind of touch a little bit on my takeaways a little bit more, but yeah, no, it's just a crazy situation. Everything that happened.
Yeah, and I feel like, I mean, we're going to talk about our takeaways, but I feel like a lot of it revolves around the Saints, right? Because you have Olave who suffered his fifth total concussion, fourth with the Saints, one obviously with OSU, obviously his second of the year in like recent weeks, relatively, and that was a nasty hit. Ironically, I actually missed that hit at first because I was watching like Sunday Ticket or what YouTube TV Sunday Ticket, whatever they call it now, and I had the four games on at one screen. And so I was had like four different games on. I kid you not, I went to the bathroom, came back, and I saw that somebody was down on the field, and I saw it was Olave. I was like, great. And then I was like, oh yeah, I saw the replay. I was like, yeah, he kind of got knocked out, which is a tough situation. So that happens, and then the Saints lose the seventh game in a row, and you're like one of those things. You're like, all right, well, I think it's a perfect time to add insult to injury and just fire Dennis Allen. So biggest thing with their seventh straight loss in a row, obviously, as you know, is what are they going to do to move forward? Obviously, I'm guessing they'll just have an interim guy the rest of the year and look to get somebody. There's some good candidates out there that would be in the coaching carousel. I mean, that you guys could definitely target, but it'll be interesting to see that. And then, as you mentioned with Olave, I think the same questions were surrounding Olave, the same questions that were surrounding Tua. And at the end of the day, you got to do what's best for you as a player. You got to do what's best for you as your health moving forward. So it'll be very interesting to see because Olave is that focal point of that passing attack for the Saints. So all in all, just a weird situation. But we'll go ahead and get into our takeaways. I'm sure you'll touch on it a little bit more later. We have our Week 9 fantasy football slash NFL takeaways from this past week. As AJ mentioned, we'll have some fantasy football takeaways as well as some NFL takeaways as well. We'll go one at a time. So we'll go ahead and give me your first takeaway from week 9.
Yeah, so I'll just stick with the Saints right there. I mean, I'm glad that Dennis Allen's fired as a Saints fan, but obviously that's news. I mean, a head coach being fired mid-season. I mean, I already mentioned this. I want to say it was 2 weeks ago now when I said Saints fire sale. Saints fire sale 2.0. Trade deadline ends uh, this Tuesday. Actually, I don't. Is this being uploaded on Tuesday on deadline?
Well, it's being recorded on Monday,
Yeah.
and I think yeah, I'm gonna upload this like I'll set it to upload for like 7 in the morning tomorrow.
Yeah, so as it's coming out, the trade deadline is on Tuesday, on the day this is being uploaded. There's a good chance that there's a lot of Saints players being traded. I mean, one of the big names is Lattimore. He's been talked about going to the Chiefs. You have guys on the D line like Peyton Turner, Chase Young, even like guys like veteran linebacker Demario Davis. I've also heard talks of potentially Olave getting traded, which I don't know how likely that is. I don't know what his value would even be at. It also doesn't really make much sense him only being so young. But again, it's going to be a fire sale there. You kind of just got to figure out what talent you have on the roster still and who you want to move forward with next year on the roster and what type of moves you're going to make during the draft. As it sits right now, I believe the Saints have the number 5 pick, maybe it's the number 6 pick. I'd assume by the end of the year they'll finish with the top 10 pick. Carr will still be in the roster next year because they still owe him $50 million for next year. So my assumption is go out, either draft a quarterback. Would be my guess. I mean, it's the first. This would be the first time the Saints draft a quarterback since Arch Manning, like 50 something years ago, 60 something years ago.
Arch Manning.
Yeah, Arch Manning was the only first round pick the Saints have ever drafted at the quarterback position. So I don't know. I think this is the time to do it. Dan Rizzi is our new intern head coach. He was our special teams coach. Seems like the team has really liked him and all that. But yeah, this is the time for the Saints to just go complete rebuild. I mean, like I said, fantasy wise, not much relevance here unless if someone like Olave gets traded somewhere else. But just with all the injuries, AK is not going to be traded because he signed that 2 year extension. It's going to be one of those things that I think it's going to be a lot more on the defensive side. I guess defense for fantasy football, not that big of a deal, but a guy like Lattimore going to one of the top run defenses in the Chiefs. Lattimore has only allowed 1 touchdown. If he goes to the Chiefs, that's a huge bolster to that defense there.
Touch on that quickly. Yeah, I'd be curious to see, obviously, for the Saints as a whole, kind of if they sell everybody and get, a lot of draft picks, young talent whatsoever. If they go out in the draft and get a quarterback, obviously you have Spencer Rattler, who you draft as a fifth round choice. Did you like what you see out of those 2, 3 games? There's some serious questions that the Saints really have to think about. Quarterback is an important position, but there's some other areas if they were to get some pieces back that could drastically help them moving forward. On top of that, you bring up a good point about fantasy because we don't really know who's getting moved right now. It's really hard to tell, and a lot of it probably on the defensive side, but maybe quarterback or even I don't know Kamara or somebody like it's always like a splash that just kind of happens. But how do those fantasy trades or those trades affect your fantasy teams? Is something to keep an eye on really for the next 24 hours on top of the election. There's a perfect time, I should say, for a trade deadline in the election. A lot of I guess attention is going to be on those two things, especially from fantasy. But my first takeaway is Lamar's the new GOAT in fantasy. Okay, I'm sorry. Lamar is absolutely tremendous. He's a number one position quarterback right now. He did it all last week, and he rushed 3 times for 4 yards, 16 for 19, 280 yards, and 3 touchdowns. I mean, he is insane. I'm really knocking on wood here because he's really carrying my dynasty team right now. But I really don't know what's going to stop Lamar because he's shown obviously that he can throw the ball. He can show that he can run the ball, and he just does it all. There was a lot of, I guess, question marks coming into when he got drafted by Baltimore at their last pick, the first round. They're like, hey, we don't think Lamar can throw. Well, a lot of people are kind of comparing that to the Anthony Richardson situation where Richardson's got the leg talent, but he doesn't necessarily have the arm, I guess, accuracy right now. So there are some similarities there. But regardless, for fantasy value, Lamar is the number one option as long as he stays healthy. He throws it, runs it, does everything you need, and averages 25 fantasy points a game. That's honestly tremendous. And like I said, I only have him in my dynasty league. Really wish I could have him in a couple more leagues, but if you have him on your team, you can use him as trade bait, especially if you have a good backup, or you can use him to help win you guys that fantasy championship. All right, what about your second takeaway?
Lamar 2.0 right now and Jane Daniels. I think at this point it's clear that we can give him the rookie of the year. Uh,
With the age too, he's super young.
yeah, with the age, I mean, one of my big things with this for fantasy is if I mean, he's not going to be available in dynasty leagues, but he is the number one dynasty quarterback right now in the NFL. I get it, Lamar. He's probably the number one quarterback to have on your team as of right now. But for the next 10 years, it's going to be Jane Daniels. Lamar, I want to say he's 27, 28 now,
Yeah,
uh,
somewhere around there.
right around that age. I mean, Jane Daniels is about to turn 24, so only 4 years younger, but I mean, he right now he's the third ranked fantasy quarterback, just under 2,000 yards, 9 passing touchdowns, only 2 interceptions. Which that was the big thing. And him in college and turnovers, he really only could turn it around that last year at LSU. But before that, when he was at ASU, I mean, he had a turnover problem. But on the ground, 459 rushing yards, 4 rushing touchdowns. I mean, dynasty purposes, he is the number one quarterback for dynasty football right now. For the next 5, 10, 15, not 15. That 15 is a little bit long. But like the next 10 years, I mean, Jane Daniels is going to be the number one
Well, sorry
quarterback.
about that. I don't really know how that's going to look on your screen. My Wi-Fi completely took a hit, but AJ was able to keep talking, which is great. I'm glad that it actually worked there. So let's go ahead and move into my second takeaway, which is going to be Jared Goff and really the Lions offense kind of seems to be the epitome of a game manager type offense. Obviously, the Lions don't care about your fantasy teams. To be fair, guys, most NFL teams, if not every 32 one of your teams, care about your fantasy teams. Okay, they really don't. In fact, there's some coaches that will even probably purposely do some stuff just to make you guys mad. But overall, the Lions' offense is a very explosive offense, but at times it's just super spotty, right? Jared Goff is a game manager. I am not throwing blame at Jared Goff for being a game manager, but he's done a tremendous job this season. But for fantasy value, is he really a guy that you can roster? I tried that experiment. Now, granted, they were on the road in Green Bay in terrible conditions with the rain and all that stuff, and it was their first game outside of a dome setting, but still, 9.6 fantasy points, 18 for 22, 145, and one touchdown. Not really going to turn the ball over. Can get explosive on the touchdowns and the yards, but especially if the running game's working, it's definitely going to be concerning. Sam Laporta really hasn't done much either, just because they haven't needed him to, right? And then you get the tandem there of David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. The only thing I'm saying is be optimistic, right? A lot of people want to stack a team on your fantasy team, like the Lions, for example, who has success, who's probably the best team in football besides the Chiefs right now. They want to do that, and it's a good strategy to do. But at times, especially with the Lions, the way that they've been playing, you just can't live with that strategy. So be curious to see kind of what happens moving forward there. But definitely maybe get guys like Amon Run who you know are going to consistently pump out a good amount of points for your fantasy teams. All right, what about your third takeaway?
Jameis is back to being Jameis, the most consistent quarterback that's in the NFL. Like he's so consistently at being inconsistent, like that's what you're getting out of him. 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. I want to say over 300 yards in his first game as the Cleveland Browns starting quarterback, and then complete 180. 236 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions. And that last touchdown, I want to say, came in the fourth quarter versus the Chargers. I mean, this is the Jameis experience. I got to see it with the Saints for a little bit of time. It was fun. You got to obviously see it with the Buccaneers with his 30-30 season where he had 3 touchdowns, 30 interceptions, but also threw for 5,000 yards. I mean, this is the Jameis that you come to expect. And it's just funny that last week I was like, oh, maybe Jameis could be an actual starting quarterback, prove his talents, and then he goes right back to what we're used to seeing with Jameis the next week. 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions, over almost 250 yards. I mean, the most Jameis back-to-back games that you could ask for there. So I just think it's funny. I again, fantasy-wise, just you can't trust anyone in Cleveland right now, especially as wide receivers. Especially like Cedric Tillman. I know he had a huge week that first week with Jameis Winston. A lot of people went and picked him up. Now you can't really trust it. I mean, Cedric Wilson, yes, he did 6 catches, 75 yards, and touchdowns, so you do have the upside there that they're going to be throwing a lot. Jameis, I want to say, had 37, 38 pass attempts 2 weeks ago. This past week had 46, so still definitely usable as wide receivers because he is going to throw a lot. But I think, honestly, Njoku is really the only weapon on that offense that you could truly trust because Nick Chubb still coming back from the injury, 15 carries, 39 yards. He did have 1 reception for -4 yards, but yeah, that Cleveland offense, if you have any shares in them outside of like Njoku or Cedric Tillman, I would just drop them at this point. I mean, none of them are really going to be usable.
So for me, my third takeaway is just going to be what the hell is going on with the Dolphins wide receivers? Okay, I thought Tua coming back would be relatively good for Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle because you'd expect that. Now Tyreek Hill did have 4 catches for 80 yards, but this is not the consistent Tyreek Hill that we've seen get 25, 26, 27 points every week. Now defenses are playing Tyreek Hill a little bit better. I understand that. Okay, that's not why I'm saying Tyreek Hill is not having success, but honestly, Tua is just not getting the ball. Then Devin Mostert. Devin A-Chain has done a tremendous job out of the backfield. The running backs have done a tremendous job out of the backfield, which has alleviated some stress from Tua. On top of that, Tua's got other options to throw the ball to now. But Jalen Waddle, again, completely non-existent as well. Had that 1 catch for a touchdown super randomly. Then had that other catch where he lost like 30 yards at the end of the game when they were like throwing the ball back, whatever. So I think he finished like 2 catches, -4 yards, and a touchdown. Just a really weird stat line. But really, the Dolphins wide receivers are a cause for concern. I ended up trading Tyreek Hill in one of the 2 leagues that I own him last week just because I couldn't deal with it anymore, especially now going to be going into next week with a 3-6 record. Golly. I can't afford that. I need more depth. I need some couple, big time wide receivers. And I just don't know if I can trust Tyreek Hill. Now, he is a guy that you can buy low on. Obviously it's Tyreek Hill, so you're not going to buy him super, for super cheap. But he's a 31st position ranked wide receiver. He's played in every game this season, and he's a 31st ranked wide receiver. So if you're a contending team, you could definitely add a piece there, maybe for a flex option wide receiver too, even adding another piece like a bench as well, and get that. But if you're kind of in a position with me in one of my leagues where I'm like 3-6, struggling to find ways to get win and get fantasy points, and you have Tyreek Hill, I definitely would trade him. Similarly to Waddle, I mean, Waddle's value obviously is a lot less than Tyreek Hill's, but kind of that same philosophy of trying to move forward. And I don't know. I just don't know what's going on. So we'll see if it ends up working out. Knowing me, it'll probably work out in the 3 weeks that I'm not in the playoffs, because that's just how my fantasy luck rolls. All right. What about your next takeaway?
I think going with the stack option is maybe one of the best things you could do for your fantasy football team. I did a huge stack in one of my leagues, my Costa League, where I have Devonta Smith and Jalen Hurts, but I also have the running back duo and Gibbs and Montgomery. Again, those are two great stacks. Even if you trade out Devonta with AJ Brown, just any of those stacks right there. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, another great stack. If you have Puka and Cup, even if you have Puka and Kyron or Kyron and Cup, one of those combos there. I mean, those stacks have paid off tremendous for me. Like Lamar and Derrick Henry, just those stacks. If you're able to get them, I say go get them. Even though it may screw over one of your fantasy weeks, like how it did for me, just ironically, all four of those guys all ended up having the same bye week, which worked out even better with the stack for my case. But those stacks have paid off huge for me. Like having both Gibbs and Montgomery, having those dual running backs there. I mean, they had, I want to say it was like 85% of the fantasy value in that last game uh, versus the Packers in that outdoor game. It was raining. It was raining hard. Montgomery had a lot more carries than Gibbs, but it went back and forth. You're just collecting as much fantasy points as possible in a game, especially when you do those stacks with high-powered offenses like the Lions. It opens up your horizons of scoring as many points as possible. Like I said, you want to do this with those high-powered offenses, the Eagles, the Bengals, the Lions, those type of teams that are explosive like that. Just those stacks have done great for me. I remember, I think it was 2 weeks ago where they put 50 something points or whatever it was. I want to say Montgomery and Gibbs, between the two of them, got me almost 65 fantasy points. So, again, if you're able to get two guys like that, I say go do it, especially next year's draft. I think a lot of people aren't going to realize that they're still just going to be drafting the way they drafted this past year. If you're able to stack guys, I say stack them.
So my fourth takeaway is going to kind of echo what you talked about earlier about Jameis Winston. First of all, I'm going to go out and say that I called it. It usually always happens where a quarterback, like a veteran quarterback in particular, comes in for, an injury, bench, whatever, has a tremendous game. Then the next game, it's always that hangover effect, kind of like the hangover effect from Super Bowl teams, unless you're the Kansas City Chiefs. And in that case, your hangover effect is winning Super Bowls year after year. But anyways, Jameis Winston obviously had a really bad game. Honestly, though, he outperformed Jared Goff as far as fantasy relevancy is concerned. So that's very concerning, to say the least. But Jameis Winston, as you know, is the guy that's super high risk, high reward. He's the guy that can throw the ball 70 yards downfield and, ratchet up 400 yards a game with 4 touchdowns. But he's also a guy that could throw 6 interceptions in a game. And he's kind of like just consistently going to be like that every time you have him. So obviously very concerning. But I was watching that game. It was ironic. I mean, in that same league that I'm 3-6, it explains a lot that my defense had 6 more points than any other position on my team, and it was the Chargers defense. So every time he was throwing the ball into the defense, I was super excited because I was getting fantasy points. But regardless, I mean, Jameis Winston, who knows? If he starts next game, he's going to probably get 30 fantasy points, and the next game too. You just kind of play Russian roulette with him, but that he's a high-flowered quarterback. Obviously, he targets Njoku. Cedric Tillman's a big guy that people should probably consider adding this week. There's some areas where you could have improvement. Jerry Jeudy, a guy that I feel like is going to be kind of a sleeper moving forward for the Browns. But famous Jameis, I feel like his reign is officially over as far as what his volume is capped at, 23.5 fantasy points. Maybe he could develop into a guy that's 16, 17 every week. But what you saw with Jameis Winston, in that first game in Week 8 against Baltimore is not what you're going to see moving forward. On top of that, the Browns do have a bye week this week. So maybe time to regroup and reset, but they're in a similar position where they could fire Stefanski as well, just because they're having a terrible season once again, and it doesn't really seem like anything's going for them, at least in this matter. Okay, your final takeaway.
That Saquon Barkley will be the number one consensus running back position player drafted for next year. I think he's going to be mocked as a number one We see it like every couple of years. Those running backs switch in and out. For a while, it was Eckler over there when he was with the Chargers for those couple of seasons. The last couple of years have been McCaffrey. We've seen wide receivers like Justin Jefferson or Tyreek Hill be mocked there, but I think we both know that it's going to usually be a running back drafted at that first spot, especially those dual backs. But Barkley, I mean, last week had a huge week there. So far on the season, in 8 games, 925 rushing yards, 6 rushing touchdowns through the air, 20 receptions for 146 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. He's on pace for almost 2,100 yards. He's on pace for over 15 total touchdowns, on pace for over 40 receptions out of the backfield. Saquon, you're going to see him in every single mock draft. You're going to see him, all the consensus, all the top guys say, oh, we're going to draft Saquon this year. We didn't know how he was going to be in this offense, and now that you see him, the ability that he's shown in this offense, and how much they rely on him, that he's going to be that consensus number one pick. I just want to throw that out there that I'm the first, not the first one, but one of the first people to probably call that as him being probably the ADP number one drafted player. Also, I have to mention that 360 whatever hurdle that behind that he didn't see the defender coming, just kind of jumped and hurdled him. I mean, that was a crazy play coming off that spin move. Just kind of everything with Saquon yesterday kind of sealed it for me that he will be or could be the first overall pick in many fantasy drafts.
Guys, I'm back once again. I don't know. I guess this is the negative components of living in an apartment complex. The Wi-Fi sometimes just randomly goes out. At least in here, I don't know what's going on with it. They were doing some construction today, and maybe they messed with some of the wires. But regardless, we're back. I got my final takeaway of the week. And my final takeaway of the week is Geno Smith is the best, worst quarterback ever. I mean, every week it seems to amaze me how bipolar of a quarterback he is. Here's the stat line. 21 for 34, 363 yards, 3 touchdowns. You're like, oh my gosh, wow. Then you see the 3 interceptions. You're like, oh my gosh, wow. Still finished with 22.1 fantasy points. He's the 7th position ranked quarterback, averaging 17 points a game. I don't get it. I just don't get it. I don't know if I could have the what's the right word? Like I don't think I could stay alive longer than 35 watching his fantasy games because of the stress that he would put me through on a consistent basis of, throwing a touchdown, throwing an interception, touchdown, interception. But say what you want to say, he's found a way to get it done, at least for now, which is mind-boggling to say the least for me. But really curious to see kind of what he happens moving forward. Obviously, he's got the talent. I mean, if you're a Seattle wide receiver or Seattle wide receiver fantasy owner, you got to be ecstatic because you have a quarterback that's getting you the ball. The biggest thing is this turning into a Jameis Winston situation where he has like 30 touchdowns and 30 interceptions because it's starting to stack up here. But Geno Smith, obviously, in the later half of his career, had that tumultuous return. What did he say? They wrote me off, but I didn't write back. Is that his famous saying?
Yep.
Yeah. So, he's got his time, but we'll be really curious to see what's going to happen moving forward. I personally think he's too inconsistent to have on your fantasy team, but he does better than any of my fantasy quarterbacks that I've ever had on my fantasy team this year. Thank you guys for listening to another episode here on The Truth. If you guys did enjoy it, make sure you follow The Truth on Twitter at The Truth as one to stay up to date with the latest information regarding The Truth, including podcast dates, podcast uploads, and other important information you don't want to miss. Make sure you guys also follow The Truth on Instagram and TikTok at the.tt.truth. I look to find a drink that offers peak hydration, raises your energy level, speeds up your recovery, and keeps your mind sharp to focus on memory. Look no further than Acid Rainwater. I'm excited to partner with Bloodline Sports, AZ, and Acid Rainwater, which focuses on peak hydration and productivity, while also maintaining ecosystem-friendly product. Use code HESSON15, that's HESSON15 for 15% off every purchase. As always, I'm your host, the one you love the most, Niall Hesson, joined once again by AJ Ponciano. Take care and good night.